Hey folks, welcome to this video. We'd like to start off by thanking Stage Precision for sponsoring this video covering SP and all the really cool things you can do with SP and TouchDesigner. In this video, our guest Ethan Alloway from Matterform Inc. is going to be looking at some really interesting ways that you can use something like an Orbbec sensor or a Kinect sensor to get some really interesting and complex data out of Stage Precision SP quickly and easily, and then bring that over into TouchDesigner for using with tools like Particles GPU or any other content that you're creating. So if you want to learn more about anything we're talking about today, links will be in the description, and let's dive right in.
Hey guys, my name is Ethan Alloway from Matterform Inc. And today we're going to be doing another SP tutorial. This time it's going to be really fun. We're going to be using LiDAR to do positional based tracking. This is a huge tool for being able to find out where people are in your installations, and also we can do non-human tracking. So this is awesome for things like balloons, beach ball, items like cars driving through a space. This is a really handy tool to have. We also are able to do volumetric triggers, which we're going to go into in a little bit. Whereas someone steps through, let's say, a doorway or an open area, you can do triggers and events based on that. So let's jump in. So this is the actual room that we're going to be working inside of. We have a LiDAR camera. This is an Orbbec Femto Mega. We're just plugged in over USB. These are awesome. These also use Ethernet cables if you want to run really long distance. That LiDAR camera is shooting out. And then our play area is defined by this rug. That's just where I trim the volume to. And as you can see, as I walk past, it actually is showing my body as an object. What's really cool is that if I add something like this chair, it will define it as its own object, and it can understand that it has its own point. It also remembers that I'm point 0 and that's point 1, which is really cool. So I can move this into different places, and it also can be merged together. So super handy tool right there. What's really nice though is that you can see there's a little tracker dot right here on me, and as I walk back and forth, there's a little trail to it, and what that's doing is it's actually tracking my acceleration and my momentary velocity, and it's giving us a position, which we're going to be using in TouchDesigner to control an installation little project that I made for that. What we can also do with this is you can see this area, it says trigger area, and if I enter this area, you can see up here it says trigger area variable equals true when I stand inside the box. And when I stand outside the box, it says false. This is really useful because this actually allows us to be able to do trigger-based systems that are volumetric. So imagine that somebody walks into the space, they're actually triggering, let's say, a doorway or something. The event will actually start based on their position. But what's really nice is that, again, that chair could be in the space and make that trigger say true. So that allows us to be able to do some really cool stuff. It doesn't need to be a person, so you don't have to have skeleton tracking working. This could be something like a beach ball that gets thrown into the scene, or some object that's being pushed in like a cart or an LED wall. All right, so now let's take a look inside of SP. So to do this, we need a few different things to be set up. Currently, I've already gotten my environment built. We are going to need a Orbbec sensor. We're going to need a volume. We're going to also need an area to do the triggers, but we're not going to worry about that one right now. We're also going to want to add a tracker in the long run to actually do the tracking based on each location. But in order to set up the sensor, first what we want to do is we would create an Orbbec sensor. We would then go and choose our device, then make sure that you turn on the point cloud data, or else it's not going to show up. Then these sensor settings should be fine. Just make sure that they are setting the VBO, which is the volume, to be the Orbbec sensor. Next, I go into maps, and this is where the actual secret sauce is happening. So we have a system right now that is using the VBO filter, and we're actually clipping the point cloud. So as you can see here, it has this massive point cloud, and we don't want all this information in our scene. So what we've done is we have added a clipping object, and that is over in my environment, and that is this cube. So if I go back over to the Orbbec sensor, you can see that that is currently what's blocking all of it. So I'm going to hide the cube again. Now let's turn that guy back on. And the way I've done that, I've literally just created an object and then just snapped it to the cube. The next thing we need to do is we need to add VBO clustering. And what this is this is blob tracking. This is grabbing the area and it's trying to figure out the nearest point to all the other points in that object. Here you can see that Elisa and this chair are being figured out as separate objects. We can go back to the Orbbec sensor and I can change that clustering tolerance till it just barely can figure out where it is. And you can see there's some noise going on down here, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So we definitely want the tolerance to be at a point where it's the most confident. So I was finding that in this scenario, 0.2 is good. Your density is going to change based on how far away your sensor is. And then again, if I disable that, you can see that it has different colors based on that. And that is coming from this button called Colorize. So what we can do then is we can go over to the volume, and all of this needs a volume in order for it to do the math to figure things out. Now, a note for a volume is that if you have your volume and you size it properly, you don't want to actually lift your volume up to meet the floor line. You want your volume to just simply be the volume in space, because that offset actually does affect it. So what I've done is I've just kept it as 0, 0, 0. I haven't offset it. And then these do line up perfectly that way. So inside of the volume, we go to the maps page. And here what we can do is we can take the volume and ask it to input the Orbbec sensor. So here we have Orbbec sensor, and then we have the OSC map, which is where it's going to output this data. So what we're doing is we're grabbing the sensor, and then we're just grabbing the first channel on it. And then we're going to be sending this, which I've added. So to add this, I've gone to add an OSC IO, and then I've added an OSC output. And then here I've just typed in Blob trigger as my address name. So now let's pop over to TouchDesigner and we'll see how this data is being used. All right, so here inside of TouchDesigner, we have a OSC input, and I'm actually just going to refresh these channels so it only sends the basic ones. So right now what we're sending is SP blob trigger 0. It has time, position, and size. This is super useful if you're trying to figure out how long someone has been engaged with your activation. This time trigger just tells you how long that blob's been going. We also have the position, XYZ. That one's really easy. And then we also have the size, and that is how large that blob is. What's cool is that if you have a bunch of little objects floating around in space, then it will, let's say, assume that they're part of a crowd. It might make that blob really big if that's what you're looking for. And that could be really useful if you're trying to do something based on a bunch of people congregating together. We're not going to be using that in this scenario. So what we're doing is we're just grabbing the TX, TY, TZ, and I'm just renaming them the TX, TY, TZ. And then I've just put them through a little bit of an extra filter so that it's a little smoother. These are then going over to this Particles GPU little plugin that I used, and I just made this little scene which has some floating leaves and stuff. So we're not going to be going over Particles GPU, but this applies to anything inside of TouchDesigner or other apps using OSC. All right, so here we have Elisa in the space walking around, and as you can see, it's binding those two positions together. And this is just simply sending OSC with the 3 channels. This is all we really need. What we're also doing on top of all of that is that we are using a tracker to also allow for some of the trails and understanding of where it was as well. So if I go through, I can actually add the trace to be a lot longer. And this is pretty handy for allowing us to see where she has walked. So if I set this to like 10 seconds, then it shows us a really nice trail of all the motion path. So how is this different than blob tracking in 2D? In 2D, we're only really able to see a top-down slice of all the different things in our LiDAR system. But in 3D, this is grabbing all of those points and it's figuring out with like an SDF style solver where in the world they actually are. And then it's sending those data points out. So it's doing all the hard work for you. You don't have to actually run this inside of your TouchDesigner project. You can run this on the side of it, which is really handy because tons of apps need to use data with LiDAR, but they maybe don't need to have the LiDAR inside of them. So this is really nice because it allows you to just functionally externalize this process to something else. Perfect. And then can you also crouch down a little bit, show the height? Yep. Great. So what's different here is that we're actually able to do full volume based triggering. So if I can have you step forward and to the left into that box. So now that she's entered this space, I've set up this other trigger using an area trigger. And this one's super rad because it allows you to actually say, if anything enters into this zone, then I want to send an event. That is done by creating an area. That's inside of logic. And by default, it's also a sphere. You can change it to whatever you want. And then move it around. And then over here in maps, in area, you add a target. And let's add that tracker. So can you step over to your right now into that other zone? Yeah, perfect. So now she's inside of this area. So we could add a new event over here and say on enter, let's add an action. So let's do something like SP center, and let's make the message for that one. And then we're going to add another one for on leave. Same thing, OSC message, SP center, and we're going to make that one 0. So now whenever she leaves this area, let's actually make it the center. Oops. Yeah, here we go, SP center. So she's inside of the right space here. And then can you step out of there for me? Perfect. That was super snappy. So what this lets you do is this lets you just handle a bunch of basic positional information. And what's really nice about this is you could do this with skeleton tracking as well. So if you had like a hand that was tracked, you could have someone go through space that triggers just that location based on if the hand is in there. Again, this is just things that you don't necessarily need to do in TouchDesigner or Unreal Engine, but you're able to do externally to it. So lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to use all of these examples together inside of this TouchDesigner project. Here you can see the position is being tracked. And then as she walks into the front left corner, it also is triggering and changing the color of the leaves into snow. Thanks so much for watching. This was a blast to make, and I hope you guys get to use these LiDAR workflows in your own systems. Have fun.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private